In June 2021, the United Nations declared the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and called for everyone to urgently become Generation Restoration. The Blue Mountains Planetary Health Initiative is creating opportunities to help us all find a way to contribute. One way is to get involved with Blue Mountain City Council's world-leading Bush Care program, which celebrates its 30th anniversary in 2022. Already, 500 volunteers work across 65 bush care groups throughout the Blue Mountains. Bush Care has adopted the Australian Bradley method of bush regeneration, and in 2022, the Planetary Health Pluriversity will be working with Bush Care and researchers to quantify this highly successful method for ecological restoration at the Old Katoomba Golf Course.
Currently, we're undergoing a mass extinction event where many species are actually threatened with extinction, and not just species but also vegetation communities. One of those vegetation communities that's threatened with extinction is Blue Mountain swamps. We have Blue Mountain swamps on this site, and by removing those threatening processes, which are the weeds which are here, not just here but in many other parts of the world, they are threatening the extinction of our Blue Mountain swamps and other locally endemic Blue Mountain species. So we actually reduce the likelihood of extinction. One of the reasons that I'm probably focusing on this Bradley method is that the Bradley method was developed by the Bradley sisters, two sisters in the northern suburbs of Sydney in the 1970s. They found out that if you removed weeds where there were lots of natives, the natives regrew, right? Whereas if you removed weeds where there were weeds, the weeds grew back and you wasted your time. Now in the 50 years since, that method has actually been the foundation for bush regeneration in Australia, for grassroots ecological restoration. And that grassroots ecological restoration has actually informed millions and millions of dollars worth of on-ground work across the whole country, and especially here so in the Blue Mountains. It's the most important piece of knowledge that a TAFE student who does conservation and land management learns. And what I'm really passionate about is actually trying to realise, or trying to appreciate, that science actually needs to recognise the knowledge that's been gained by that grassroots bush regeneration, decades of experience, and try to actually understand scientifically and quantify scientifically what the people on the ground do every day. And that's, I think, it's simple and it's complicated at the same time. And that's, I guess, I think we have to start simple and basic and not try to expect too much, because I think the simplest and most fundamental things that we learn are actually the easiest to teach other people. We use a relatively simple 3-tier condition score. The highest condition is bushland that has almost no weeds. It's pretty much free of disturbances, and it has intact vegetation units. Then we have the lowest condition score, which is bushland that's really, really weed infested, very few natives, very disturbed. And then the middle is somewhere in between. So moderately disturbed bushland that has a mix of natives and weeds. If we do apply it here, you can see behind us we have a wall of privet, and that's actually on Liz has just walked through that from the golf course fairway, and that wall of privet has come in basically because it's on the edge of the bushland. And then we have, looking down, we actually can see quite good condition bushland. So with very little weeds, intact native vegetation units. And yet where we are right now, between the so-called good zones, which is a simplistic term, and the so-called bad zones, we have a radiata pine, and we have privet, in a little bit of privet in the mid-story, and we have quite a few privet, small leaf privet seedlings. And so we're in the transition here between the intact bush colonising and the invasive species moving in. So this was what we'd map as a moderate condition zone. So essentially I'm going across the whole site, and what I'm doing is I'm updating mapping that was done in 2009 by our Community Conservation Officer, Linda Thomas. She mapped the whole site into zones for contractors to work, and in doing so she more or less came up with a condition map. So I'm able to use that and update it. More or less the patterns are the same, but I'm just obviously in 10 years weeds grow, so things have moved. Now the reason that I'm using that is once we have a baseline map of the condition, we can make a plan to restore the site. We can work using the Bradley method, we can work in the good zones, and if there are any weeds left in those, remove those first, and then we can expand out into the yellow and the red. Now the reason we want to do this in a very systematic way is that for a large area of bushland such as this, it's actually going to take a huge amount of time to restore the entire site. And what we want to do is make sure that we're actually doing it systematically, so we know exactly where the good zones are, we know exactly where the moderate zones are that we do second, and we know where the last priority was the red zones. So what we can do is, as we start to remove weeds, we can track the death of those weeds, we can track the next successional stage of weed recruitment and native recruitment across the site within the zones on GIS, and we can actually record what is essentially an improvement in vegetation health as a subset of planetary health. What we actually want to try and achieve here is to engage with land managers, professional bush regenerators, and people on the ground that might be interested in doing bush regeneration. What we're doing is we're actually going to try and quantify a system of strategic weed removal that isn't just about reading and thinking. It's actually something that you do and you learn from doing, which is a fundamentally important part of teaching, and it's an important part of learning. So we're trying to quantify something that you're doing with your hands. And so I think by people will hopefully enjoy doing things with their hands and then having what they've done quantified, so they can actually put the two together.
We'll be running regen picnics throughout 2022. Contact the Planetary Health Initiative if you'd like to join us.